On the morning of March the 7th, 1944, Vice Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa stood on the bridge of Japan's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, Taiho, as the sun rose over Lingga Roads off Sumatra. Beneath his feet was not just a warship, but the final hope of the Imperial Japanese Navy. 32 months of labor, 16,000 tons of steel, and a desperate bid to remain relevant in a war already decided thousands of miles away in American shipyards. Taiho was Japan's first and only purpose-built fleet carrier completed during the war, while across the Pacific, the United States had commissioned 17 in the same period. Ozawa couldn't comprehend how the Americans had done it. Japan, once the master of carrier warfare, had built one. The Americans, who had supposedly started from nothing, were launching new fleet carriers monthly. The numbers made it clear. Japan had already lost the war. Mathematically, industrially, and irreversibly. When Japan entered the war, it possessed the most powerful carrier fleet in the world. 6 fleet carriers and 2 light carriers, battle-tested and manned by elite pilots with decades of experience. In contrast, the United States Navy had 4 carriers and little real-world carrier combat experience. But from the very start, Japan faced an unspoken truth. It was fighting an industrial superpower capable of outproducing it 10 to 1 in every measure that mattered. Steel, oil, machinery, and shipyard capacity. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had studied in America, understood this better than anyone. He warned Tokyo that Japan might win battles for 6 months, perhaps a year, but beyond that, America's industrial might would crush them. Tokyo ignored him. They believed spirit could overcome steel, but by 1942, that illusion began to shatter. In May 1942, the light carrier Shoho went down at Coral Sea, and 1 month later, at Midway, 4 of Japan's 6 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk in 6 devastating minutes. 20 years of Japanese naval development disappeared beneath the waves. It took Japan 4 years on average to build a fleet carrier. Replacing those 4 would take 17 years of construction time. But Japan didn't have that time, nor the shipyard capacity. Only 3 major yards could build carriers, and they were already overwhelmed producing destroyers, submarines, and merchant ships. So Japan focused on building one, Taiho, and converting existing ships into makeshift light carriers. It was a desperate compromise, and it failed catastrophically. While Taiho took 32 months to complete, the American USS Essex, larger, faster, and more heavily armed, was built in just 20 months. Worse, the Essex wasn't alone. By 1943, 11 Essex-class carriers had joined the fleet. By contrast, Japan completed Taiho, 1 ship. Ozawa's intelligence officers refused to believe the numbers, until reconnaissance photos confirmed the impossible. The Americans were launching new carriers faster than Japan could train the pilots to fly from. Them! The secret behind this miracle of production lay not in naval tradition, but in industrial revolution, and in one man, Henry J. Kaiser. A construction magnate who had built dams, not ships, Kaiser applied mass production and prefabrication principles to shipbuilding. He divided ship construction into sections built separately, decks, hulls, engine rooms, and welded them together like giant puzzle pieces. By 1943, his shipyards were producing Liberty ships in just over 40 days, and one record-setting ship, the SS Robert E. Peary, was built in 4 days. When the Navy asked for escort carriers, Kaiser delivered 50 of them in just 14 months, 1 every 8 days. Traditional shipbuilders called it madness. The Japanese called it impossible. But Kaiser's modular system spread across the United States. Newport News Shipbuilding applied it to fleet carriers, standardizing every component: decks, elevators, radar masts, and propulsion systems. Everything was prefabricated, tested, and installed as modular units. This innovation cut construction times from 4 years to 14 months, with each Essex-class carrier rolling off the shipways nearly identical to the last. Japan could not replicate this. Its factories were built for craftsmanship, not mass production. Every plate of steel had to be measured, fitted, and refitted by hand. Every mistake had to be corrected because there was no steel to waste. American shipyards ordered 15% extra steel to account for errors. Japan couldn't afford 1%. The United States produced 80 million tons of steel in 1944. Japan produced 6. The Americans had railroads to transport prefabricated parts across the continent in days. Japan relied on ships that were increasingly sunk by U.S. submarines before reaching the yards. Even when Japan tried to mass-produce smaller Unryu-class carriers, only 3 were completed, while the Americans built 9 Essex-class carriers in the same 10-week period. The Japanese ran out of engines, out of fuel, out of skilled workers, and finally, out of time. Some carriers had to be fitted with destroyer turbines because the proper power plants couldn't be built. Their speed dropped from 34 knots to 25, making them easy prey. And even when the ships were ready, there were no pilots. By 1944, Japan's once elite aviators were gone, replaced by undertrained, underexperienced recruits who barely knew how to land on a carrier deck. Fuel shortages cut training time from 2 years to 6 months. Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's top aces, was horrified at the decline in pilot standards when he became an instructor. The results were visible at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In June 1944, Ozawa commanded 9 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku, and 6 light carriers, against Admiral Mark Mitcher's Task Force 58, which fielded 15 carriers with 956 aircraft. Ozawa had 450 planes, many flown by pilots on their first combat mission. Within hours, radar-directed American fighters, primarily the rugged, fast, and well-armored F-6F Hellcats, tore through Japan's strike waves. 300 Japanese planes were shot down in one day. The Americans lost 29. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot ended Japan's carrier air power. That same day, Taiho was struck by a single torpedo from the submarine USS Kavala. The damage was manageable until a ventilation error spread gasoline fumes through the ship. 6 hours later, a spark ignited the vapor. The mighty Taiho, Japan's most advanced carrier, symbol of its last industrial hope, exploded and sank, taking 1,272 men with her. She had been in service just 3 months. By late 1944, Japan's carrier fleet was gone. At Leyte Gulf, its last 4 carriers sailed as decoys, empty decks meant to lure American forces away from the real battle. They were all sunk. Zuikaku, the last survivor of Pearl Harbor, went down under American bombs. By the war's end, Japan had no operational fleet carriers left. The United States had 28. America's triumph was not merely a victory of numbers, it was a victory of systems. Prefabrication, welding, modular design, standardized parts, and nationwide logistics had turned shipbuilding into an industrial science. When American carriers like USS Franklin were heavily damaged, they were repaired in months using prefabricated sections. Japan had no such capability. When their ships were hit, they sank. In the end, Ozawa's haunting question, "How did they do it?" had a simple, devastating answer. They did it with industry. Japan's warriors fought with courage and skill, but courage could not weld steel, nor could spirit mass-produce carriers. In the Pacific War, victory belonged not just to admirals or pilots, but to welders, riveters, crane operators, and factory workers across an entire continent who built the arsenal of democracy.